I think this might be the key passage for this really polemical essay. I mean, it's an essay. It's polemical. It's arguing a specific point and trying to convince people of the truth of the conclusion. And the conclusion, the thing he's working towards, is a federal system, a republic, a form of government that's democratic in the sense that the people have the ultimate sovereignty. But instead of direct democracy or some other form, it's a representative democracy, a republic, where that the people put their will or their power into the hands of elected representatives who actually pass legislation. That seems to be the solution here. But the problem again is faction, and he says, by a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole. So for him, a faction doesn't have to be a minority. In fact, I think he's more worried about a faction of the majority, and especially a faction of the poor, right? Which comes in at the end. I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. So how do you solve that problem? He says there are different ways you can address it. There are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction. The one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. And it's the second one that we'll be going with, right? There are, again, two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. And of course, he doesn't want to do that, right? Because the whole point of, I guess, throwing off the authority of the British Empire and starting a new country is it'll be a free country. So one way you can remove faction is just by taking away people's liberties, so they won't be able to form factions, and that would be to form basically a society without freedom. And we can see it in the world. I mean, in totalitarian countries, say like North Korea, there are no factions because people aren't free to form factions, right? But we don't want that, he says. So there are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to existence. The other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests, which is also that's actually impossible. That is, you're not going to be able to make everybody think the same. I mean, if everybody thought the same, there would be no factions. But everybody's not going to think the same. So this method of dealing with factions, of removing its causes, is not something that he thinks we would want or that would even be possible. The method that he chooses is not of destroying the causes of faction, but of controlling its effects, and that's through a republic. A republic, by which you mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. And I think this is where really you have to look at it, see what his reasons are for thinking that a republic, a representative democracy, I think would be a way to put it, is a cure that would, as he says, control the effects of faction. Now, I mean, this again, you have to see what his answer is or why he thinks that a republic would be the cure and whether you're really convinced by that. I mean, he believes that the kind of people who would be elected would be more prone to keep in mind the common good. And he also thinks that if the republic is large enough, that the people who elect the representative will be varied enough that no one faction will be able to say that it's got its candidate and be in control. Now you have to look at that, his reasoning for why he thinks a republic would be the best way of dealing with faction. Just wanted to quote one more thing. This is at the end, and he's thinking of really his fears for the kind of factions that would emerge, that would inevitably emerge, and the ones that are most dangerous. And I think it's quite telling. He says a rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project. will be less apt to to spread the whole body of the union than a particular member of it. In the same proportion as such a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state. So if we spread out the, the voting over a large area, so a lot of different people with different interests are electing a candidate, they would be less likely to elect someone who is heavily partisan and represents one particular faction. But I think it's quite interesting the things that he lists here: the rage for paper money as opposed to gold, right? I suppose coinage, for an abolition of debts, equal division of property, or any other improper, wicked project. I think one of his main fear here is really the poor and the kind of rights that he's most interested in protecting are property rights, which I think is quite interesting. His main fear is not a faction that would be a small number of people who would be selfish. I think his main fear is a faction of the majority, and a faction of the majority would be the people who have little or no property, and they would pose a danger to the people who do have property. So quite interesting, right? Especially with thinking forward to later in the course, and we're reading things like Marx's Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, where that's what they're advocating, right? Is that the people who have nothing, the poor, do form a kind of a faction of the majority and destroy the system and take away the property of the rich. So quite a telling list of fears at the end, I think.